He had a huge entourage of supporters who were just so happy and supportive of him. And it struck me as very interesting that, here's a guy who has been criminally charged with 22 counts of battery, sexual battery, attempted sexual battery, and attempted to dissuade a witness. And he is wildly popular.
So, Alex, your reporting on this topic of clergy sex abuse is centered around a priest named Father Antonio Castaneda, who's based in California now, but who previously was in the Yakima Diocese of Central Washington in the Catholic Church. Tell us a little bit more about the story of Father Antonio, as he's known, in Yakima.
Jesus Antonio Castaneda Serna, better known to parishioners as Father Antonio, was a Catholic priest at a small rural parish in Cowiche called St. Juan Diego from about 2003 to 2005. And towards the end of 2005, the Yakima Diocese placed him on administrative leave while they looked into a complaint that he had shared something that he had learned in confession. He eventually resigned and became an Anglican priest here in Fresno. And according to an internal memo that we were able to obtain in the process of reporting this investigation, a private investigator that was hired by the Yakima Diocese looked into an allegation by a former church volunteer. The memo documents a conversation between the private investigator and the man who said that he had a bad experience with Father Antonio, that Father Antonio tried to be sexually aggressive with him, and that he believed that Father Antonio abused his power. He goes on to outline in detail an incident that he said had occurred in which the man says that he, at that time, had discovered a tumor in his testicle, had gone and seen a doctor. He was concerned about it and had mentioned it to Father Antonio. And he said that Father Antonio asked to see the tumor. And the man said that he told Father Antonio that he had already seen a doctor, to which he says Castaneda replied, I am a doctor and I'm responsible for your health and you must let me see it. The memo goes on to outline how the man told the investigator that Castaneda had touched him, touched his genitals all over, and that eventually he said everything looked okay, and that the man told the investigator that he was very upset and asked Father Antonio if he was happy.
Okay, so Father Antonio is based in the Yakima Valley in the Yakima Diocese, and he eventually goes to California, like you've talked about. When he goes there, he tries to join the Anglican Church. And in the process of doing so, the Anglican officials there reach out to people in Yakima Diocese and try to learn more about his past and his background. What did they ask? What was sort of the communication between the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church?
Right. So in 2007, this is a couple of years after Antonio Castaneda is placed on administrative leave, he applies to be received as a priest into the Anglican Church. And the local Anglican diocese here in Fresno is the Anglican Diocese of San Joaquin. So the Anglican diocese hires a company to conduct a background check on Castaneda. And so that company sends a questionnaire to the Yakima Diocese asking a series of questions. The bishop at the time in Yakima responds saying that he is unable to fill out the questionnaire, but that Castaneda was dismissed for, quote, substantive and grave reasons. Leadership at the Yakima Diocese learns that the Anglican Diocese here is moving forward with receiving Father Antonio into the priesthood anyway. And the Yakima Diocese contacts Fresno again and basically further clarifies the reasons why they were not able to fill out that questionnaire. And they basically further clarify and say Father Antonio was accused of violating the seal of confession. Years later, the Yakima Diocese notifies the Anglican Diocese here in Fresno that an allegation surfaced that Father Antonio had inappropriately touched the genitals of a young adult male under his pastoral care while serving as pastor of St. Juan Diego. In those letters, it appears to show that Castaneda traveled to Yakima, but perhaps did not meet with the private investigator. Ultimately, Bishop John David Schofield, who was the bishop here at the Anglican Diocese in Fresno at the time, writes to Yakima and says, I've spoken with Father Antonio, and to the best of my ability, it appears that he has been wrongly accused.
Okay, so fast forward then a couple of years, then after he's been in California a while, he's joined the Anglican Church. then you start looking into these allegations. So there's more allegations during his time in California. I just wonder, how did you come across the story and how did you start looking into this several years later?
Yeah, so last year, this was a time when there was a lot of media attention on allegations of sexual misconduct regarding multiple priests of the Catholic Diocese of Fresno. There were roughly 8 or so priests that were on administrative leave at the time, and I was reporting on a priest in Bakersfield, Craig Harrison. Several accusers had come forward alleging the various accusations of sexual misconduct, and I was reporting on that at the time and speaking with sources and advocates, including those with SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. And I got talking with one board member of SNAP who was saying that the members of their organization were especially concerned about the Latino community in the Central Valley, and that they were asking themselves, are we doing enough to reach this community? We don't really have a lot of members of our organization who speak Spanish. And at the time, you could see a lot of the people who were coming forward and making these allegations were of a similar demographic. A lot of the accusers were, of course, now adults, but at the time were teenagers from rural communities, immigrant parents, low income households, where, according to these stories that they were telling, the priest was being very helpful to the family in some way. And so it kind of just was on my radar to kind of look into how is this community being impacted by, alleged priest sex abuse, and kind of struck me as interesting that I hadn't really seen any reporting on this community as much as others when it comes to reporting on priest sex abuse. And so this board member of SNAP pointed me to Antonio Castaneda's case. He was actually arrested when I was in Mexico on a fellowship, so I didn't read about it until later, but I started going to his court hearings, and it was very, very interesting because being in the courtroom with Antonio Castaneda, this is Fresno Superior Court, so these are preliminary hearings. It's very early on in the process, but there's defendants in custody, out of custody, DAs, public defenders running around. It's a very chaotic scene. It's not like one person's case at a time. So I didn't really know who was there to see which case. But Antonio Castaneda is called up. He has whatever interaction he needs to have with the judge. And when he's dismissed, about half the courtroom emptied out because almost everyone was there to support him. He had a huge entourage of supporters who were just so happy and supportive of him. And it struck me as very interesting that, here's a guy who has been criminally charged with 22 counts of battery, sexual battery, attempted sexual battery, and attempted to dissuade a witness, and he is wildly popular. And so I was fascinated and I wanted to find out, what was it that actually happened here? If these people are so convinced that he really is innocent, why would Fresno PD think that there's enough evidence to arrest him? And so I reached out to his attorney, who put me in touch with a woman who is the wife of his current assistant. And I started texting her, and she said, "Come to Mass. We have nothing to hide." And they were very generous with the access that they gave me. That eventually changed after I had an interview with the Archbishop of his current, the organization that his current church belongs to. And that's when things kind of change in the reporting process. But that's how I got turned on to the story.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that, the current church, because he's essentially been kicked out of or defrocked from the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, and he's now saying, or he's participating in the services and is a clergy of, let me get it right, the World Communion of Christian Celtic Convergence Churches. It's a little bit of a mouthful. What have they said about why they ordained him, knowing that there was these allegations from two previous churches?
The Archbishop of North America for the church is a man named Bruce Taylor, and I was able to speak with him at length. He basically said that, this is a nation of laws and a country where defendants are innocent until proven guilty. As far as he is concerned, Antonio Castaneda is innocent until proven guilty by a jury of his peers. It was really interesting because in my reporting, I did speak with the current bishop of the Anglican Diocese here, Bishop Eric Moniz, who said that when he confronted Antonio Castaneda with the allegations here in Fresno, that Castaneda did not deny the allegations, that he said he had learned this healing ministry in India. And when I talked to Taylor, he said, perhaps that there was a language barrier. Father Antonio is Colombian. He's a native Spanish speaker. English is not his first language. Perhaps he didn't understand what he was admitting to. And he also pointed to an argument that I've heard often from a lot of Father Antonio's followers, which is that we don't know the immigration status of every one of the alleged victims, but we do know that some, if not most, are non-citizens. And so a lot of the supporters have said that, maybe people are making up lies because they want papers. They're trying to get a U visa, which is a visa that you can get if you cooperate with law enforcement in prosecuting a case. And so that was one of the things that Taylor said, is that, that could be a motivating factor for these alleged victims, that, they're making these false accusations against Father Antonio because they want to obtain legal status in the U.S.
And so you mentioned that Father Antonio Castaneda had, said this about the language barrier as a potential, thing intervening in the case and the allegations. But I just wonder, has he said anything to you directly, or did he say anything maybe through a lawyer about the allegations against him?
Yeah, so I don't know if Castaneda has said, I didn't understand what I was admitting to. I know that the bishop here, Eric Moniz, said that he worked with Father Antonio to draft a statement, and the bishop said that later on, and that the statement was admitting to some of what was alleged. And Bishop Moniz said that later on, Father Antonio retracted that statement. But Castaneda has denied all allegations through his attorney. The Yakima Diocese has said they did everything that they could to warn church officials here in Fresno. One of the things that stuck out to me that the chancellor said was that he said, I can't imagine the Yakima Diocese having the resources to follow Father Antonio around with a sign saying, don't go near this man. Also with the Anglican Diocese here in Fresno, Bishop Moniz, from what he told us, from what the police records appear to show, he notified police right away and has connected the alleged victims with a counselor who's still working with them.
Well, it's good information, and it's thorough and very excellent reporting. And we thank you, Alex Hall, for joining us to share it with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You
can see more on this story and the full half-hour radio special at KQED.org. And for more Northwest news, come to our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.